Hey guys, tonight we slip into a city that never really sleeps. Not because of bright lights or jazz bars, but because some names echo too loudly in the silence. Cheung Tze-keung. You might know him as Big Spender, but in the 1990s, he wasn't just tossing chips at the Macau tables. He was abducting billionaires in broad daylight and vanishing with millions like it was a stage act. Picture this. Skyscrapers glowing over Victoria Harbor, high rollers clinking glasses, and somewhere in the shadows, a man with a golden Rolex and a devilish grin is deciding which tycoon he'll kidnap next. He didn't steal from banks. He went straight to the top floor. You probably wouldn't last 5 minutes in his shoes, unless you had a pistol tucked beneath a designer suit and the nerve to talk back to Interpol. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is on your end. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He steps onto the Kowloon sidewalk like it owes him rent. Cheung Tze-keung is 20-something, draped in labels nobody around him can pronounce, flashing the kind of smile you wear when you know you're untouchable. The streetlights catch on his wrist, a solid gold Rolex with just enough diamonds to make you uncomfortable. There's no crowd around him, but somehow the air still parts. You'd think he was an actor arriving late to his own film. It's the early 1990s, and Hong Kong is humming. Money's everywhere, but so are nerves. The handover from Britain to China is on the horizon, and everyone's playing high-stakes games. Businessmen, politicians, and people like Cheung, who understands that chaos is the best cover for ambition. He doesn't call himself a gangster. In fact, he rarely calls himself anything. He prefers to let his entrance do the work. And tonight, like many nights before, that entrance begins at a neon-soaked bar in Tsui, where the whiskey is overpriced and the company dangerous. 2 fingers of Yamazaki, he tells the bartender, barely glancing up. Behind him, someone mutters, "That's Big Spender," because by now, that's what they all call him. The guy who rolls into jewelry stores just to buy 5 watches and only wear 1. The guy who tips casino dealers more than some triads pay their hitmen. The guy who walks into a room and makes billionaires wonder if they lock their doors tight enough. But he wasn't always this person. Before the flash and the name, there was Cheung. Back then, Cheung was just a skinny kid running rice across the border to Guangdong, ducking patrols and memorizing schedules better than any adult. His family was poor, not just in the way that means skipping dessert, but in the way that means eating silence for dinner. His father ran a small grocery stand. His mother worked when she could. The rest was up to Cheung, and he didn't wait for permission. It started small. Cigarettes, watches, transistor radios. By 12, he could name every police patrol route. By 15, he was bargaining with smugglers like he had gray in his hair. It wasn't charm, it was survival, a performance sharpened by need, and it worked. He learned early that money didn't come to the loudest, but to the boldest. While his classmates worried about test scores, he worried about customs inspections and bribes that didn't stick. Many people still think that if Cheung had been born into a different family, with softer winters and safer walls, he might have ended up a tycoon himself. Legit, wealthy, maybe even knighted. So what do you think? Was it circumstance or character that wrote this script? By the time he was in his early 20s, he dropped out of school entirely. That wasn't a dramatic rebellion. It was logistics. He had businesses to run. Smuggling was no longer petty. It was organized, scalable. He treated it like a startup before the term existed, but then came the taste for more. Not just money, attention, fear, reverence. He started dressing like a movie star. Custom suits, sunglasses indoors, always carrying a sleek black pistol in a designer holster, just visible enough to matter. He'd walk into a cafe, and the air would shift, the way it does when someone important enters, not because of title or role, but because everyone just knows. It wasn't long before his nickname trailed behind him like expensive cologne. Big Spender. He didn't invent it, but he leaned into it like a marketing executive. When he entered the Lisboa casino in Macau for the first time, people assumed he was just another flashy gambler, until he threw down a stack of cash that would have paid someone's mortgage and lost it like it didn't matter. Then did it again. Then tipped the dealer with a Rolex. No one forgot that night. Back in Hong Kong, he started cultivating relationships. Not the polite kind, the kind that came with scars and cigarettes and whispered phone calls. Triads noticed him. The 14K, the Sun Yi On. They didn't recruit him formally. They didn't need to. He already acted like one of them, and he had one thing that many of them didn't. Charm. Not the fake kind. The real kind that could smooth over a gun deal gone wrong or make a furious casino boss pause mid-threat. Of course, charm can't protect you forever. But at this point, Cheung didn't think he needed protection. He thought he was the storm. People began telling stories that he robbed a gold shop in Central by smiling his way past the guard, that he crashed a triad wedding uninvited and left with the bride's bracelet, that he once bet a Bentley on a single hand of baccarat and didn't flinch when he lost. Some of those stories are true, some aren't. And Cheung? He never corrected anyone. He liked being legend adjacent. In a city growing more uncertain by the day, with laws poised to change and safety no longer guaranteed, people clung to myths. And Cheung Tze-keung, Big Spender, was becoming the loudest myth in town. And the most dangerous part? He hadn't even started kidnapping yet. Before there were Rolexes, there was rust. Before neon-lit kidnappings and newspaper covers, there was a boy in threadbare shoes, crouched by the border fence at Chateau Coq, watching for patrol shadows. His name was Cheung Tze-keung, and he knew even then that the only way out was forward and fast. He doesn't remember a first crime. Not really. Not the way people imagine, with a stolen apple or a lifted wallet. No, for Cheung, the earliest acts of illegality weren't rebellion. They were routine. His childhood smelled of dry rice, diesel fumes, and riverbank mud. The border wasn't a line to him. It was a breathing thing, pulsing with risk and opportunity. His job was to move things from here to there without being seen. That's all. No gun, no gang, just instinct. He learned which guards took bribes, which days they were hung over, and how long he had between footfalls on gravel. There was math in it, rhythm, a kind of crude ballet danced in silence. One day, he watched an older smuggler get caught, tackled hard, ribs cracking under boots. Cheung didn't flinch. He simply rerouted. That was his gift, even back then. Not panic, but pivot. And it wasn't long before the neighborhood noticed. By his teens, Cheung had what others called a face for trouble. That mix of impish charm and latent menace that drew followers and repelled questions. He didn't just survive, he organized. He mapped routes, rationed payments, ran errands for low-tier triads, not because he wanted to join, but because he knew he could outgrow them. He never smoked, rarely drank, but he always carried himself like he'd invented risk. At 15, he stopped pretending school mattered. Not because he was failing, he wasn't. but because the classroom seemed too small for someone already negotiating border trades in hushed alleyways. Instead, he studied the streets. He watched how older gangsters moved, how they barked orders, how they dressed down juniors, how they strutted into restaurants like they owned the air. But he also noticed their mistakes. The ones who spent too loud, the ones who made enemies they didn't need, the ones who thought fear lasted longer than respect. Many people still think that Cheung's genius wasn't in violence or planning, but in pattern recognition. He didn't just see what worked, he saw what almost worked and avoided it entirely. So what do you think? Is genius in action or in restraint? He learned quickly that Hong Kong's underworld wasn't as glamorous as the movies made it seem. There were no Bond villains, just desperate men with twitchy hands and bad credit. But Cheung didn't hate them. He just wanted to play the same game, with a better hand. His first big solo score wasn't recorded in any police report. That's because it wasn't flashy. It was efficient. He hijacked a smuggling truck mid-route and sold everything inside to a rival buyer within 12 hours. No violence, no trace. Just a truck parked innocently by a noodle shop at dawn, empty and forgotten. With the profit, he bought himself a suit. Not a great one, but tailored, sharp enough to tell the world, I'm not just another street punk. From there, the transformation accelerated. He moved between districts like a roomer, never staying long, always learning. He'd pop up in Sham Shui Po to play cards with a jeweler, then reappear in Mong Kok buying electronics at bulk. He kept no address, slept in guest houses or apartments borrowed from acquaintances. He was becoming fluid, untraceable, untouchable, and then came the Mercedes. He didn't buy it, not directly. He convinced a crooked importer to rent it to him for a few weeks, promising exposure in the right circles. What Cheung didn't say was that he planned to never give it back. He didn't need the car to get anywhere. He needed the car to be seen. He'd roll down Nathan Road, windows half lowered, sunglasses on even at dusk, music low and expensive. People turned. They always turned. It was the first time Hong Kong's gossip circuit started whispering the name Big Spender. He never called himself that. Others did. He simply nodded and let it stick. It wasn't long before women followed the car. Not just for the money, though that helped, but for the myth. The way he made even a sidewalk seem like a private runway. He was polite, always. Almost old-fashioned in how he treated waiters, clerks, anyone below the line. But with rivals, with cops, he smiled through his teeth. That year, a photo surfaced of Cheung in a velvet blazer, standing next to a Macau casino owner during a charity gala. The photo wasn't scandalous. What was scandalous was the fact that no one remembered inviting him. He had simply shown up, dressed for power, and acted like he belonged. And people, not wanting to seem uninformed, assumed he did. That was Cheung's greatest magic trick, confidence as camouflage. But the mask wasn't flawless. Behind the gold rings and champagne laughs was someone who didn't sleep much, who listened to police radio chatter for fun, who memorized the names of every prosecutor in Central, who, deep down, feared mediocrity more than prison. Historical note here. In the early 1990s, Hong Kong's crime rate was shifting. Traditional triads were losing control of certain rackets, and newer, flashier criminals were rising. Less blood, more business. Cheung fit right into this mold. Not a legacy gangster, a startup criminal. At this point in his rise, he wasn't even technically doing anything outrageous. He was just doing everything with so much flair, it felt illegal. He paid in cash, always, in thick, clean stacks. He once tipped a maitre d' with a gold lighter, not engraved, just heavy, but beneath the glitter was strategy. He wasn't showing off. He was distracting. Because while people stared at his wristwatch, they didn't see the quiet conversations in the back room, or the way he tracked who owed what and when. Cheung Tze-keung wasn't a gangster yet. Not really. But he was a man preparing for something much, much bigger. The first time Cheung Tze-keung got arrested, it barely made the papers. It was for a small-time smuggling charge. Cigarettes and imported electronics. Nothing dramatic. But he was in and out before the ink dried on the report. The arresting officer later described him as surprisingly calm, like someone who knew the booking process better than the cops did. When asked for a statement, Cheung just smiled and said, "You write what you need to. I'll be home before your shift ends." And he was. That's how it began. With brushes, not battles. With warnings, not wounds. But every brush with the law seemed to harden something in him, not out of fear, but curiosity. He wasn't interested in staying out of jail. He wanted to see how close he could get without falling in. After that, Cheung became careful. Not cautious, but methodical. He stopped carrying anything that could directly link him to a crime. No more tools, no marked bills, no fingerprints. If something went down, he was conveniently across town, caught on camera buying coffee or tipping a street musician. He began to treat the city like a chessboard, and he was always 3 moves ahead. It was around this time that people noticed a change in his circles. No longer just low-level hustlers or nightclub promoters. He was meeting with men who wore gold watches inside their sleeves, who spoke in coded tones, who didn't flinch when the word gun came up in conversation. Triad adjacent, they called him. Not a sworn member of any group, not the 14K, not Sun Yeon, not Wo Shing Wo, but connected enough that he didn't need to be. Many people still think that Cheung's greatest move was never joining any triad formally. That way, when they fell, he didn't fall with them. So what do you think? Is loyalty protection or a leash? He wasn't interested in loyalty. He was interested in leverage, and he began using his connections like poker chips. If a deal went bad in Mongkok, he'd call in a favor from Tuen Mun. If a rival tried to flex in Yuen Long, Cheung would have the guy's cousin's business audited within a week. No threats, no blood, just consequences. Delayed, surgical, elegant. One evening, a minor thug tried to pull a gun on Cheung during a card game. The man was drunk, loud, and clearly outmatched, but he wanted to make a point. Cheung didn't flinch. He simply stood, smoothed the crease in his slacks, and walked out without a word. The next morning, that same thug was found tied to a park bench, naked, unharmed, but missing his shoes and wallet. There was no blood, no bruises, just a message, spelled in cigarette butts. Learn timing. Cheung never admitted it, never had to. Word got around, and so did the nickname, Big Spender. At first, it was a joke. Something whispered by waitstaff or security guards when he walked into a club and ordered drinks he barely sipped. But soon, it stuck, because he wasn't just spending money, he was performing it. He'd walk into jewelry stores unannounced, ask for whatever costs the most, and buy it twice. Once to wear, once to lose in a bet. He once ordered champagne for every table at a wedding he wasn't even invited to, because he liked the bride's shoes. There was a kind of theater in how he operated, not just in spending, but in being seen spending. His wallet became a character, and the audience always applauded. But here's the catch. Beneath the flamboyance Cheung was planning something. Every handshake, every round of drinks, every exaggerated laugh, it was camouflage. He was watching which tycoons tipped well, which ones looked over their shoulder, which ones traveled without bodyguards. He was mapping the nervous system of Hong Kong's elite, not for pleasure, but for future leverage. That year, Hong Kong's economic boom reached fever pitch. The stock exchange pulsed with activity. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, and billionaires bloomed seemingly overnight. The disparity between rich and poor had never been sharper, and Cheung saw it all, not with envy, but with strategy. Because while the world watched tycoons climb Forbes lists, Cheung watched for cracks. His apartment, if you could call it that, was tucked above a pawn shop in Jordan. Modest from the outside, but inside, it was a command center. Notebooks lined the walls, handwritten accounts, names, car models, security routines. He didn't just know what time Walter Kwok left the office. He knew which driver was on rotation and what kind of sandwich the man preferred. This wasn't obsession. It was research, because Cheung was no longer content with gold watches and fast cars. That was child's play. He wanted legacy, and that meant doing something no one else dared. Flipping the food chain. Why rob banks when you can rob the people who own them? At this stage, no one suspected a thing. The police considered him loud, not lethal. The triads respected him, but didn't take him seriously. The tycoons, they barely registered his existence, and that was his final layer of camouflage, underestimation. Meanwhile, Macau continued to be his playground. He'd visit the Lisboa, the VIP rooms of the Sands, even the back alleys of Taipa, gambling not for money, but for information. He didn't always win, but he always learned. He became fluent in reading fear, in knowing when a man was bluffing, not in poker, but in real life. You can't fake that knowledge. You have to earn it the hard way, by losing, observing, and waiting. He once told a close associate, "I don't care about winning the hand. I care about knowing who folds." Back in Hong Kong, his network widened. A few nightclub owners, a couple of rogue customs officers, one very nervous banker. Cheung never made threats. He made offers, quiet ones, always reasonable, always with an out. But once you shook his hand, you were on the board. Historical fact here. By the early 90s, Hong Kong had one of the densest concentrations of ultra-wealthy individuals in the world. Yet personal security remained shockingly lax. Most tycoons moved without armored cars. Their children attended regular schools. Their homes, while luxurious, often had outdated surveillance. It was a gold mine for anyone bold enough to dig. And Cheung? He was already holding the shovel. He walks into the room like it's a stage and everyone else forgot their lines. It's a Tuesday night, a private club in Central. The lighting is low but deliberate. Reflections of expensive glassware shimmer across dark mahogany walls. There's jazz bleeding faintly from unseen speakers, the kind of music that sounds expensive even if you don't like it. Cheung Tze-keung adjusts his cuffs, flashes a half smile, and nods to the maitre d', who doesn't ask if he has a reservation. Of course he doesn't. Big spender doesn't book tables. He simply arrives. Tonight, he's not here to gamble or drink or even show off. Tonight, he's taking inventory of people. Who's sitting with who? Who's laughing too loud? Who's checking their watch like they don't feel safe? He doesn't write any of it down. Doesn't need to. Every detail sinks in and files itself away somewhere deep behind that smooth expression. At his table, 2 low-level brokers, 1 nightclub investor, and a junior executive from a security firm who doesn't realize he's being recruited. Cheung doesn't say much. He lets the wine and nerves do the talking. But when he does speak, it's deliberate, low, and steady, like a man who already knows the outcome of a conversation before it begins. If someone wanted to grab a rich man in this city, he murmurs between sips of red, do you think the police would care more or less than the newspapers? The men chuckle awkwardly. He smiles as if he's joking, but no one's really sure. By now, the legend of Big Spender is getting crowded with contradictions. Some say he robbed a van full of Rolex watches and handed half out to strangers. Others say he slapped a triad boss in public and got away with it. One rumor claims he bought a week's worth of airtime just to play a silent commercial. Nothing but his face, nodding. None of that is confirmed. But what is confirmed is that people notice him, and not just for the way he spends money. It's the way he pauses before he speaks, the stillness he carries like a loaded gun. Even standing still, Cheung has movement in him, like he's halfway through a decision you won't understand until it's too late. He's not flashy in the loud way anymore. The early years of gaudy suits and loud shoes have given way to something sharper. Now it's tailored Italian blends, thin lens glasses, minimalist watches, quiet money, wealth so assured it doesn't have to explain itself. He buys influence the same way he used to buy dinner, generously, with no follow-up questions. A tip here, a loan there, a favor repaid in silence. And slowly, the network tightens. He now has drivers, errand boys, lookouts. None of them wear uniforms, but they all move like a crew. At any given time, Cheung can call in 30 favors without lifting the phone himself. He knows a man in Macau who can supply burner phones in bulk. He knows a mainland official who can erase license plate histories. He knows 2 former police officers who specialize in creative surveillance blind spots. And yet, through all this, he's still officially unaffiliated. No triad tattoo, no oath. He's his own brand, his own ecosystem. Many people still think that if Cheung had joined a major gang, he wouldn't have lasted as long. That independence gave him maneuverability. So what do you think? Does being outside the system protect you, or leave you without backup when the hammer drops? Tonight, that same jazz club conversation drifts toward insurance fraud, blackmail, and the curious vulnerability of Hong Kong tycoons. They don't think it can happen here, Cheung says quietly, swirling his drink. They lock the doors, but leave the windows open. The others laugh again, but more hesitantly now. One of them excuses himself early. That's fine. Cheung's already made his decision. Not about a victim, no, not yet, but about the kind of victim. He's bored with street-level crime. Robbing trucks, fencing goods, even gambling. It all feels juvenile now. He wants to build something operatic, a crime that echoes, something no one can ignore, something that bends the air in a room whenever his name is whispered. And then he remembers a newspaper article he saw just weeks earlier, a puff piece on a real estate tycoon's family. Harmless fluff, but it mentioned something casual, an after-school pickup, a lunch spot, a driver's name, a crack in the marble. From that moment, the plan begins to calcify. Slowly, carefully, not yet drawn in blueprints, but real in shape. But before he moves on that plan, Cheung indulges in one more thing. Spectacle. He throws what will later be called the most outrageous private party of the decade, held in a rented ballroom in Macau. It includes champagne fountains, dancers flown in from Taiwan, and an actual tiger caged in glass, because he'd read somewhere that Western billionaires liked that kind of thing. No one's sure what the occasion is. Cheung doesn't say. He just smiles, raises a glass, and announces, "To disappearing." Most guests laugh, assuming it's a metaphor. It's not. Historical fact. At this time, Hong Kong was facing an uncertain future. With the 1997 handover looming, the territory's elite were either preparing to flee or fortify. The police force was evolving rapidly, but not fast enough to adapt to criminals like Cheung, non-traditional, independent, and unshackled by gang politics. It created a temporary gap in power, a crack in the city's armor. Cheung was slipping through that gap, and with every passing day, his ambitions grew bolder. He no longer wanted to be feared. He wanted to be unforgettable. There's something about a man who walks into a jewelry shop not to browse, but to buy whatever hurts the register the most. Cheung Tze-keung does just that on a muggy Wednesday afternoon in Mongkok. He steps through the glass doors in a soft gray suit. No entourage, no appointment. Just the sort of composure that suggests he owns time, and might rent some to you if you ask nicely. The clerk greets him nervously, not because Cheung's famous, not yet, but because the man's stillness hums like something loaded. Cheung says, "I'd like something that makes a banker sweat." He walks out 30 minutes later with 2 diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watches and a ring he doesn't plan to wear. Not once does he ask the price. He tosses one of the watches to the doorman on his way out. Sell it or wear it, doesn't matter. That kind of generosity, chaotic, unpredictable, intoxicating, becomes his trademark. But it's more than flash. Every excessive gesture is calculated. He knows people will talk. He wants them to, because while they're busy gossiping about his outrageous tips, they're not asking what he's really doing with his nights. That same evening, Cheung is sitting in a smoky back room of a mahjong parlor in Yau Ma Tei, not playing, watching. Across from him, 2 mid-level debt collectors and a weapons supplier who likes to run his mouth when he's drunk. Cheung doesn't care about the tiles. He cares about who twitches when the stakes rise, who knows when to fold, and who doesn't recognize a setup when it walks through the door in handmade leather shoes. They talk about drugs, guns, one-up each other with stories of intimidation and cash collections gone sideways. Cheung listens, smiles faintly. He's already beyond them. At one point, someone asks him what he does. He replies, "I'm in real estate." The table laughs, but he's not joking. Not exactly. Because he's planning to redefine the concept, not with deeds or titles, but with leverage, with people as property, tycoons as assets. And it's here, in this haze of cigarette smoke and false bravado, that Cheung begins to truly sharpen his edge. He watches how men posture, how they inflate stories, how they crumble when asked direct questions. It's not about strength. It's about silence. Cheung knows that silence, well placed, is more frightening than a threat. It leaves room for the imagination. And imagination is a dangerous thing in a city like this. The next day, he drives to the Lisboa casino in Macau. He parks his new Bentley like he's dropping off dry cleaning and walks in alone. The security guards nod. The dealers nod. The waitstaff nod. Everyone knows him now. He doesn't even sit at a table. He walks past the high-stakes room and straight into the private lounge where businessmen and mid-level politicians go to avoid attention. He orders tea. He sits near a man named Mr. Han, who manages overseas transfers for a major Chinese conglomerate. Cheung compliments his shoes, says nothing else, and leaves after 5 minutes. 2 days later, Mr. Han gets a phone call. No caller ID, just Cheung's voice. "You left your lighter at the Lisboa. Want me to hold it or burn it?" Click. It's not a threat. It's a demonstration. Cheung knows who you are, where you are, what you wore, what you touched. You're never just having tea. And that's when the money starts moving differently. He's no longer spending it like a show. He's moving it like a chess piece. Through shell accounts, through antique deals, through casinos where every chip tells a story, but none leave a paper trail. He starts working with a Vietnamese jeweler who deals in raw stones, easy to transport, hard to trace. He buys a property in Shenzhen under an associate's name. He purchases artwork through a shady auction house in Guangzhou, then has the paintings destroyed. Not because he hates art, because it's a safe way to hide cash flow. Historical fact. In the early 1990s, Macau casinos were used heavily for money laundering, especially by Hong Kong and mainland Chinese criminal groups. Chips could be bought, played lightly, and cashed out clean. For someone like Cheung, it was less a loophole, more a red carpet. But with more money comes more eyes. And Cheung starts noticing them. At first, it's just a van parked too long outside a club. Then it's a stranger sitting at a bar, ordering a drink he doesn't finish. Then it's a customs official who seems too friendly. The net isn't closing yet, but it's there, so he escalates the performance. He starts hosting dinners in hotel suites with gold-draped tables and imported wine. Not for friends, for rivals. He invites men who've insulted him, then outspends them at their own games. He'll lose 500,000 in cards just to watch someone flinch at 10. It's not about winning, it's about knowing who folds. And the more he learns, the clearer the picture becomes. These men, these billionaires, these boardroom emperors, they're not warriors. They're not even particularly secure. They move through the world assuming no one will touch them, that their status is a shield. But Cheung sees it differently. He sees their soft spots, their children, their habits, their roots, the things they don't expect anyone to notice. He starts experimenting, not with actual kidnappings, not yet, but with rehearsals. He has a driver tail a prominent businessman's car from Central to Stanley, times the journey, notes the lack of surveillance, the lunch routine, the route back. Every detail goes in the notebook. Then he has someone else do the same thing. Different day, different car, same results. Too easy. He repeats this with 4 more targets over 3 weeks. No red flags, no tailbacks, no shake-offs. And that's when he knows. The rich of Hong Kong are ripe for the picking, not because they're weak, but because they've never imagined someone like Cheung. Many people still think that his plan was formed in one lightning moment, a eureka in some smoky back room. But the truth is slower. Cheung built the idea piece by piece, with every handshake, every watch purchase, every drink shared with men who underestimated him. So what do you think? Is ambition born in a spark or forged in quiet repetition? By now, Cheung is no longer just a legend in bars and back alleys. He's something worse. He's unseen. By the police, by the rich, by the triads who laugh too soon when his name comes up. But they'll learn. They always do. There's a difference between being feared and being understood. Cheung Tze-keung had no interest in the former. He was aiming for something rarer. He wanted to be the kind of man whose name didn't make people tremble, but pause. The kind that made conversations trail off, forks freeze midair. Not because they were scared, but because they didn't know how they felt. That ambiguity, it was power. And by the early 1990s, he wielded it like a conductor's baton. He wasn't officially a gangster, not in the tattooed, oath-sworn way that marked Hong Kong's triad world. He hadn't gone through the red pole rituals. No chicken blood on an altar, no incense under moonlight. But he had what mattered more than ceremony: access. The 14K triad noticed him first. Their enforcers respected his nerve, even if they didn't always understand his methods. Cheung didn't do extortion the way they did. He didn't bark orders or shake down noodle stalls. He wore suits they couldn't afford and paid tabs they couldn't dream of. He operated above street level. Still, he earned their trust, partly because he was generous. He helped launder money through Macau casinos. He offered logistics for smuggling routes. ones even veterans hadn't considered. And he always paid his debts. Fast, in cash, often with a tip. That's what set him apart. Where others threatened, Cheung negotiated. Where others demanded, he implied. He'd walk into a room of dangerous men, sit at the edge of a couch like he had all day, and ask, "Do you want to fix this the easy way or the profitable way?" And somehow, they always chose profitable. He cultivated this hybrid identity, neither inside nor outside, just close enough to be useful, just distant enough to be untouchable. Many people still think that Cheung's entire career was possible because of this balancing act. Too criminal to be ignored, too independent to be controlled. So what do you think? Is power safer on the edge of the circle or right in the center? He became a kind of mythic freelancer. One month, he was helping triads smuggle luxury cars into Guangdong. The next, he was tipping off a customs officer in exchange for 5 minutes of surveillance silence. The month after that, he was in Taiwan, purchasing unregistered firearms from a man who spoke only in chess metaphors. He wasn't building an empire, he was building infrastructure. And yet, through all of this, he kept his operations clean. No unnecessary blood, no reckless mess. Violence, when it came, was brief and surgical. And Cheung himself never touched the blade. That was part of his brand. He wasn't the one kicking down doors. He was the one sipping tea in a hotel lobby while the job got done across the city. But every legend needs a signature scene, and for Cheung, that came on a rainy night in Suanwan. A rival mid-level operator, someone who'd been skimming from a casino pot Cheung had a silent stake in, decided to flex. Loudly. Publicly. He accused Cheung of laundering money through shell real estate firms. Even dropped his name at a police gambling inquiry. It wasn't a smart move. 2 nights later, the man's prized Mercedes-Benz was found upside down in a drainage ditch near Shatin. No driver, no injuries. But inside, neatly placed on the dashboard, was a velvet box. Inside that box, a gold watch identical to the one Cheung had worn the previous week. He never admitted to orchestrating it. He didn't have to. The message was clear. I see you. I hear you. And I don't need to touch you to move you. That single incident did more for his reputation than 1,000 bar fights. After that, whispers about Big Spender began to change. They weren't just about how much he tipped or how well he dressed. They were about timing, control, presence. He was no longer just a man who lived large. He was someone you didn't want to cross. Not because he'd shoot you, but because you'd never see it coming if he didn't. Historical fact. At the time, Hong Kong was cracking down on gang-related activities. New task forces were being assembled. Special attention was being given to organized crime and money laundering. But Cheung flew under the radar. His name never appeared in major triad databases. He didn't lead a gang, and that kept him invisible. Still, people noticed. Not the cops, the Tycoons. They began asking questions at dinner parties. Have you heard of this fellow? Cheung something? He's always in Macau, isn't he? Some sort of businessman. He gave my driver a tip that was bigger than the bill. Cheung was creeping into elite circles not by force, but by proximity. He started showing up at charity galas, silent auctions, yacht parties, not invited, just present. He'd wear crisp suits, stand near the bar, compliment someone's cufflinks, then leave before dessert. No scandal, no scene, just enough of a presence to be remembered, just enough mystery to be repeated. It was performance art, and every performance pulled him closer to his real goal, because what he was studying, carefully, obsessively, was routine. He knew when Walter Kwok's driver changed shifts. He knew which elevator Victor Lee used at the Central Plaza. He knew how long it took a security gate to open at certain high-rise compounds. Not because he was planning something, but because he was practicing how to plan. He called it ghost casing, a term he invented for observing without being noticed, preparing without committing. By now, he had a small inner circle. Not a gang, not loyalists, but paid men, drivers, errand runners, a surveillance expert who used to work in airport security. All of them knew pieces, but no one knew the full story. Because the full story hadn't happened yet. He was building the stage, assembling props, auditioning roles, and every time a billionaire smiled politely and looked away, Cheung smiled back. The script was nearly ready. All that was left was the opening act. It starts, as many of Cheung's moves do, with a table, not a poker table, not a war table, a breakfast table, inside a penthouse suite at the Grand Hyatt. A quiet morning, filtered light, eggs overcooked just slightly. Cheung Tze-keung sits across from a man named Uncle Fat, a fixer with a talent for logistics and a stomach for ambiguity. Between them, 3 cell phones, a map of Hong Kong's new territories, and a single silver pen. Cheung leans forward. "You ever kidnap someone?" Uncle Fat blinks once, twice. "No," he says slowly. "But I imagine it's like moving fragile furniture. Just don't drop it." Cheung smiles. Not wide, just enough. That's what I thought. And just like that, the conversation shifts from fantasy to feasibility. He doesn't announce a plan. He asks questions. How long can someone be held without attracting helicopters? What's the optimal number of guards? How many burner phones can be cycled before the signal pings? These are not philosophical musings. These are blueprints in disguise. That morning, over dry toast and green tea, Cheung sketches the outline of a new kind of crime for Hong Kong. Not a bank robbery, not an assassination. Something more refined, more symmetrical, a kidnapping, but not of a rival gangster or some mid-level loan shark. That's amateur work. He wants a name, a billionaire, someone whose disappearance would cause a ripple, not a splash. Someone whose return would cost millions. He already has the list. He's had it for months. Folded in the back of a notebook, updated weekly. Walter Kwok is at the top. Head of Sun Hung Kai Properties. Family worth billions. Schedule predictable. Security light. And most importantly, he moves through the city like he's made of air. Unbothered, unarmed. Perfect. But Cheung doesn't move yet. Instead, he rehearses. He rents a warehouse in Tuen Mun, under a fake construction company. Installs soundproofing. Builds a false wall. Times how long it takes to get from the building's main road to the hidden back entrance. He hires a contractor to install industrial locks. Tells him it's for art storage. Next, he tests human logistics. He hires a young man to be picked up, blindfolded, driven across Kowloon, and dropped off near the Star Ferry. The kid thinks it's a test for a reality TV show. He never realizes it was an actual trial run for a kidnapping route. Cheung watches the whole thing unfold from a distance, stopwatch in hand. 22 minutes. Room for improvement. He runs it again. 17. Again. 14. Each time smoother. Each time quieter. He begins assigning code names. Mr. Blue for the warehouse driver. Echo for the signal scrambler. Ghost for the surveillance tail. It's not just theatrics. It's insulation. The fewer names spoken aloud, the less that can be traced. He buys burner phones in batches, each activated with stolen IDs. He tests their signal ranges from deep basements and elevator shafts. He discovers which models drop signal fastest and which ones bounce off reflective glass. Everything is data. Everything is curated, even the food. He sends an assistant to interview private chefs, not for himself, but to create a controlled meal plan for the soon-to-be captive. Bland, nutritious, familiar, he says. No allergens, no spice, nothing memorable. When asked why, he answers without emotion. Comfort breeds compliance. Many people still think Cheung was improvising his crimes, winging it with charm and nerve. But this wasn't improv. This was engineering. So what do you think? Are masterminds born or built in breakfast meetings? And then comes the question no one wants to ask aloud. What happens if the hostage dies? Cheung doesn't flinch. We return the body, respectfully. No cuts, no blood, clean clothes, proper shoes. People pay more for dignity than fear. There's a silence after that. Even Uncle Fat shifts uncomfortably. But the message is clear. This isn't about cruelty. This is business. Still, Cheung isn't cold. Not entirely. He insists on a code of conduct. No shouting. No unnecessary restraints. No bruises. He even drafts a set of guidelines for his inner circle, typed, laminated, and distributed in unmarked envelopes. It's a strange kind of professionalism. At night, he walks the streets of Central alone, testing street lamps, noting blind spots between CCTV coverage. He times how long it takes for a car to be noticed if it double parks outside the Galleria. He's no longer planning a crime. He's designing a system. Historical fact. At the time, Hong Kong's billionaires were publicly visible and surprisingly unprotected. With crime perceived to be low and police generally responsive, most tycoons relied on minimal personal security. This complacency made them ideal targets for someone with Cheung's precision. His obsession with detail grows. He hires a tailor to sew hidden pouches into his suits, one for micro recorders, one for emergency currency. He practices changing license plates in under 2 minutes. He shaves seconds off phone calls, starts speaking in fragments. He's disappearing from his own life, one small efficiency at a time, and just as the machine is nearly ready, Cheung tests the last component, himself. For 3 days, he goes dark. No calls, no sightings. He vanishes into the folds of the city. When he returns, he finds that his absence stirred more fear than his presence ever did. A nightclub he frequented has doubled its private security. A businessman he once drank with has hired a second driver. His name now travels not in whispers, but in precautions, and that's when he knows he's ready. The plan for Walter Kwok's kidnapping is no longer theoretical. The timeline is set. The team is briefed. The tools are packed. And Cheung, he doesn't blink, because for the first time in his chaotic, glittering life, he's not improvising, he's conducting. The heat presses down on Hong Kong like a damp wool blanket as June 1997 approaches. In the air, a mixture of uncertainty, celebration, and tension. The British are preparing to hand the territory over to China, and everyone with power is quietly asking the same question. What's going to change, and who's going to get hurt first? Cheung Tze-keung sees it differently. To him, the handover isn't a threat. It's a distraction. A perfect one. Bureaucrats are preoccupied. Security forces are in flux. Billionaires are either celebrating at cocktail parties or preparing exit strategies. In that tiny sliver of political murkiness, Cheung sees his opening. He knows the extradition laws are about to shift. He knows that once the handover happens, things will harden. Escape routes will close. Surveillance will improve. And tycoons, those elusive, untouchable titans, will be harder to reach. That makes now the ideal time to strike. But he's not rushing. He spends the first week of June finalizing pieces like a grandmaster moving pawns with surgical calm. Burner phones, ready. Vehicles, untraceable, freshly painted. License plates interchangeable. Safe house, stocked, sealed, soundproofed. He double-checks the meal plan, the layout, even the bolt tension on the back door exit. Walter Kwok, meanwhile, lives in a very different world. Glass towers, boardroom luncheons, manicured golf greens. As one of the heirs to Sun Hung Kai Properties, his empire is vast, invisible, and surprisingly vulnerable. Cheung doesn't need an invitation. He already knows Kwok's routes, the make and model of his driver's car, the patterns of his lunch breaks, the exact moment he is most alone in public. The morning it happens, the skies are overcast. A luxury sedan pulls up to a quiet turnoff in Deepwater Bay. Walter Kwok is in the back seat, scanning documents, barely looking up. He thinks he's between meetings. He thinks this is just a pause in the day, and then everything shifts. Two men step into the road, dressed like utility workers. Calm, efficient. One waves something. An orange flag? A badge? It doesn't matter. The driver slows. That's all Cheung's team needs. In less than 10 seconds, the doors fly open. A hood is pulled. Zip ties snap shut. No shouting. No blood. Just a quiet, almost clinical execution. Kwok disappears. Gone. Just like that. Cheung is already at the safe house, pacing gently in a white undershirt and slacks, sipping green tea from a thermos. When his phone vibrates once, one buzz, no ring, he knows it's done. The city doesn't notice, not yet, and that's part of the plan. Cheung doesn't demand ransom immediately. He lets the silence settle. Let the Tycoons family wonder if this is a prank, a miscommunication, a late meeting. Let the panic unfold slowly, because fear matures like wine. Walter Kwok is treated politely. He's fed, given fresh clothes, no violence, no yelling. But he's told clearly that this is a transaction. You are an asset. You will be returned when value is exchanged. And behind that smooth language, the machinery begins turning. Cheung makes the first call, not to the police, not to the tabloids, but to Kwok's family attorney. The man's voice cracks when he hears the tape. Not screaming, not threats, just Walter Kwok, calmly reading a pre-written statement confirming his safety and requesting cooperation. The ransom demand is H600 million, roughly U77 million. It is the largest ever ransom in Hong Kong's history. But here's the most shocking part. They pay quickly, quietly. No cops, no press, no delays. The money is split, shifted, washed. Some of it heads to Europe, some to accounts in Singapore. A large portion is routed through Macau casinos and converted into high-value chips. And Cheung, he vanishes. Historical fact. Walter Kwok was indeed kidnapped in 1997. The details of his disappearance were kept private at the time, and the ransom was quietly paid. It wasn't until years later that Cheung Tze-keung publicly bragged about the entire operation. The city reacts in two parts. Outwardly, silence. No headlines, no public statements. Inwardly, shock. Billionaires scramble to increase their security. Executive car fleets are updated. Bodyguards are hired. Flight plans are changed. Board meetings are canceled. Cheung's crime doesn't just hit a man. It hits an entire class. And what surprises them most isn't that it happened. It's that it worked. There were no shootouts, no public standoffs, no paper trail, just precision. And now everyone's wondering, who's next? Cheung, meanwhile, is back in Macau, not hiding, celebrating. He checks into a suite at the Sands under a false name, but doesn't bother with disguises. He strolls the casino floor with champagne in one hand, a custom lighter in the other. He tips in red chips and speaks in code only his team understands. And while others would have gone underground, Cheung starts planning another hit, because in his mind, the Walter Kwok operation wasn't the end of a story. It was proof of concept. he doesn't consider that he might have just painted the biggest possible target on his own back. Because in that moment, surrounded by baccarat tables, swirling lights, and a city still in denial, Cheung Tze-keung doesn't feel like a criminal. He feels like a revolutionary. There's a subtle tremor in the air now, a kind of tension that only the rich can feel. It moves through boardrooms like static, brushes against the backs of necks in chauffeured cars, curls into the espresso foam at five-star hotels. In Hong Kong's elite circles, the name Big Spender is no longer a party anecdote. It's a warning. And Cheung Tze-keung, he knows it. He can feel the shift in posture when he enters a room, the way conversations hiccup, how even powerful men now measure his mood before speaking. That's the thing about violence done quietly. It lingers longer. The Walter Kwok operation wasn't just profitable. It rewrote the atmosphere. But Cheung isn't satisfied. To him, it's not enough to prove something once. He wants repetition, symmetry, validation. And he's already picked his next mark. Victor Li, son of Li Ka-shing, Hong Kong's most powerful tycoon. A man whose fortune threads through everything from shipping to real estate to retail. Li Ka-shing isn't just wealthy, he's untouchable. Or so everyone believes. And that belief? It's Cheung's invitation. Unlike Walter Kwok, Victor Li moves with more caution. His roots shift, his calendar is encrypted, and his father has quietly increased security since the last incident. But Cheung thrives on difficulty. The more secure the target, the sweeter the humiliation when it works. He begins tailing Victor in whispers, never personally, always through layers. One team tracks vehicles, another intercepts schedules, a third plants a silent contact near Lee's driver, and over weeks of patient observation, Cheung sees the crack, a pattern in evening meetings, a specific route taken on Thursdays, a blind curve near Shusun Hill where the road narrows and surveillance drops. It's all he needs. And so, just weeks after collecting $600 million from the Kwok family, Cheung sets the second plan in motion. This time there's less rehearsal, more certainty. The system works. It just needs to be scaled. On a Thursday evening, Victor Li's car disappears. No gunfire, no car chase, no witnesses. It's as if the road opened up and swallowed him. Within hours, a phone call is made. Not to the police, but to a private liaison known only to the Li family's inner circle. The voice on the other end is calm, familiar. It's Cheung, or someone using his script. The request is clear, HK 1 billion. That's roughly use $129 million, a sum so absurd it silences the room. But Cheung doesn't negotiate. Not this time. He simply offers proof. Audio clips. A whispered code phrase only Victor's father would recognize. And then, he waits. Many people still think this ransom was never paid. That the Li family, with its political influence and corporate muscle, pushed back. But reports from insiders, ones never officially confirmed, say otherwise. So what do you think? Did Hong Kong's most powerful man pay to protect his legacy, or did someone else quietly make it all disappear? What is certain is that Victor Li was returned, unharmed, and no arrests were made. And Cheung? He disappeared again, this time deeper. He routed the money through offshore banks, some of it moved by diplomats, some of it pushed through Macau's casino system under layers of fake names and silent chips. He set aside percentages for bribes, logistics, safe houses. He even bought silence from a handful of high-level figures on the mainland. Men with clean suits and dirty inboxes, the kind who could disappear a file with a single phone call. By now, Cheung's myth has overtaken his name. Even police investigators refer to him as Big Spender, half admiring, half furious. He's not just a fugitive, he's a phenomenon. Historical fact. Victor Li, son of Li Ka-shing, was indeed kidnapped in 1996. Details were scarce and remain controversial. Some reports suggest the ransom was paid within hours. Li Ka-shing has never confirmed it publicly. However, Cheung Tze-keung later confessed to orchestrating the crime, and his account included details never made public. And what does Cheung do with the money? Not what you'd expect. No yachts, no villas in Europe, no fleets of cars. He spends it strategically. He begins investing in mainland relationships, not stocks, people, low-level officials, mid-tier bureaucrats. He pays for school tuitions, hospital bills, even construction equipment for a village near Shenzhen. Not out of kindness, out of planning. Every favor is an investment, every envelope a future passport. Because Cheung knows something most criminals don't. Money is an escape. Access is. He purchases identities, safe names, clean fingerprints. He buys intel from former customs agents about which borders are weakest and when. He studies flight patterns not to flee, but to know which airports might lose a name in the system. And slowly, he begins constructing a second life. One not built on gold watches and swagger, but on air. Because if the first act of his career was spectacle, the second is vanishing. But he doesn't vanish yet, because Cheung can't help himself. He walks through Central again, not in a convoy, not in a disguise. Just one man, one suit, one watch. He enters a high-end steakhouse and orders dinner alone. The maitre d' blinks, startled, unsure what to say. Cheung smiles. "Don't worry," he says. "I'm not here to take anyone." And then he laughs, not loud, but enough to turn heads. That's the paradox of Cheung Tze-keung. He's everywhere and nowhere, feared and admired, hunted but untouched. He's not hiding, he's hovering, and every tycoon in the city knows it. The newspapers don't print a word. Not about Victor Lee, not about ransoms, not about Cheung. The silence is coordinated, hushed through favors, fear, and an unspoken agreement among Hong Kong's elite. Don't make him bigger than he already is. But in the quiet, Cheung Tze-keung becomes something larger than fame. He becomes folklore. You hear him in whispers outside high-rises. See him in the way executives flinch when their phones ring too late at night. His name floats across mahjong tables, darting between rumor and myth like smoke curling from a cigar. And while everyone's still reeling from the audacity of the second kidnapping, Cheung is already several steps ahead. He's gone to ground, but not in hiding, in comfort. His safe house now isn't some run-down warehouse. It's a full penthouse suite in Shenzhen, shielded by multiple floors of plausible deniability. He doesn't rent it. He owns the building through 3 layers of shell companies. The doorman greets him by a different name. The staff is rotated weekly. Surveillance? Already mapped, understood, and rerouted. He eats well, sleeps late, doesn't rush. He's done more than anyone ever dared in Hong Kong. And he's still free. But beneath that calm veneer, the temperature is rising. Because Cheung doesn't just know how to commit crimes. He knows how to read a room. And the room, lately, has shifted. There are whispers of pressure from Beijing. Pressure on the Hong Kong police. Pressure on Macau authorities. Pressure on everyone who's ever looked the other way. And those whispers? They don't scare Cheung. They bore him. The problem now isn't survival. It's interest. He's too smart to keep kidnapping. The risks are growing. The response time's shortening. The money harder to clean. He's starting to feel like a magician repeating his best trick. The crowd still applauds, but the thrill is fading. He toys with the idea of retiring, maybe leaving Asia altogether. South America? Portugal? He's already got the documents. He even tests a flight route through Hanoi to Madrid under a name that doesn't exist on any watch list. It works, but he doesn't take it because Cheung doesn't want to disappear. Not yet. Instead, he goes back to the Lisboa casino in Macau. He walks through the VIP floor like a returning champion, tips the bartender, laughs with a pit boss, orders an old-fashioned like it's still 1992. Everyone pretends not to see him, because acknowledging him means admitting that law no longer matters here. He plays baccarat for hours. Wins, loses, doesn't care. He's not here for money. He's here to feel the weight of being above it all. But then something changes. On his way out, a security guard, new, young, overconfident, asks to check Cheung's ID. Just procedure, he says. Cheung doesn't flinch. He hands over a card with a smile. Do I look like trouble? The guard doesn't respond. Hands it back. Cheung walks on, but he knows. The room has shifted. Someone wanted that check to happen, and it wasn't the guard. From that moment, Cheung tightens his routine. He reduces calls, cuts off half his network, stops visiting Hong Kong entirely. He's not spooked, but he's alert. Because for the first time in a long time, someone else is setting the tempo. Meanwhile, across the border, Hong Kong is holding its breath. The city hasn't changed much on the surface. There are still skyscrapers, luxury cars, soft jazz at hotel bars. But beneath that polish, there's a new tension. Tycoons now move with security convoys. Board meetings are shuffled at the last minute. Families take vacations without announcing them. Cheung's fingerprints are nowhere, but his effect is everywhere. Historical fact. The kidnappings of Victor Lee and Walter Kwok led to a seismic shift in private security across Hong Kong. Billionaires began adopting international protection protocols, hiring ex-military bodyguards, installing armored vehicles, and restructuring family movements. Cheung's crimes, though rare, forever changed how Hong Kong's elite viewed their safety. Back in Shenzhen, Cheung starts writing. Not a memoir, notes, observations, names, loose ends. He catalogs every favor owed, every deal made, every potential weakness in his own structure. Not out of paranoia, but curiosity. He wants to know where the cracks are before someone else finds them. And in those quiet evenings, something else surfaces. Loneliness. Not the kind that comes from solitude. The kind that comes from being above everyone. No one around him understands the scope of what he's done. They admire, they obey, they fear, but none of them get it. He begins meeting fewer people, spending more time by himself, walking the rooftop of his building at midnight, looking down on a city that never knew what touched it. And that's when he makes the decision. One last job, not a kidnapping, not even a heist. Just one final statement, a move that will echo beyond headlines. Something that cements his place, not just in criminal history, but in cultural memory. But before he can act, the elevator in his building begins arriving on floors he didn't call. The woman at the lobby desk changes twice in 1 week. A courier arrives with a package he didn't order. The signs are small, but Cheung sees them, because when you've haunted a city long enough, you know when it starts haunting you back. The first official report is little more than a ripple, a single line in a Guangdong Regional Intelligence Bulletin noting a suspicious figure of Hong Kong origin residing in Shenzhen's upscale Nanshan district. No name, no photo, just coordinates and a vague reference to financial irregularities. But for Cheung Tze-keung, it's a gunshot in a silent room. He reads the report days after it's filed, slipped to him by a sympathetic officer who owes him 3 favors and a niece's wedding dowry. He doesn't panic. He folds the paper precisely and places it beneath a jade paperweight shaped like a tiger. Then, without speaking, he begins to shut things down. Phones, burned, vehicles, relocated and wiped, accounts, emptied or rerouted to ghost entities. It's a ritual now, clean and practiced. Like folding a suit before a funeral. He tells no one, not even his closest men, because Cheung knows. When the eyes finally turn toward you, it's already too late to blink. He's not surprised, only slightly disappointed. He'd expected the pressure to come from Hong Kong, maybe a new task force, some overeager commissioner eager to make headlines. But this is Beijing, and when the mainland looks your way, it doesn't blink. It erases. Still, he holds position. For days, he walks the rooftop garden of his compound like it's a memory palace. He stares down at the traffic. Black cars, blue taxis, unmarked vans, and imagines which ones are already listening. He knows the rules. Mainland surveillance doesn't chase. It waits, and Cheung is starting to feel the weight. On the fourth night after reading the report, he eats dinner alone. Steamed fish, rice, hot tea. No wine, no music. Just the hum of air conditioning and the silence of knowing you might not finish the week where you started it. Then a knock at the door. Not the loud, sloppy knock of hotel staff. A single polite tap. He opens it to find nothing, just an envelope. Inside, a printed photo of his car parked outside a casino in Zhuhai. No message, no threat, just clarity. Many people still think Cheung was betrayed by someone inside. That a driver or girl or card dealer gave him up for a light sentence or a cash reward. So what do you think? Do empires fall because of betrayal? Or because they were always built to collapse? Either way, he knows now. The game is over. He packs one small suitcase, cash, passports, 2 clean phones, and a change of clothes, and walks out the back of the building before dawn. No goodbyes, no fanfare. Just a man in a quiet suit slipping into a quieter car. He doesn't run. He relocates. 2 hours later, he's in Zhongshan, tucked into a safe house behind a shuttered herbal medicine shop owned by a widow who thinks he's an antique buyer. He spends 3 days there, barely sleeping, checking news headlines, and listening to static-heavy radio broadcasts from Hong Kong. Nothing, not a whisper of his name, which only confirms his fear. They're already moving. Because when Chinese authorities decide to act, they do not advertise. They surround, and on the morning of August 28, 1998, they do. At 5:17 a.m., a dozen plainclothes officers swarm the alley behind the medicine shop. They don't wear badges. They don't shout. They move like they've rehearsed it 100 times. One man knocks at the front door. The others breach the back. Cheung is still brushing his teeth. There's no shootout, no chase. Just a moment, 5 seconds at most, when he locks eyes with the lead officer and smiles, like he's been expecting him. Because he has. The arrest is methodical. No cuffs. Just silence and respectful distance. The officers don't ask questions. They already have the answers. Cheung says nothing. Not during the car ride. Not during the booking. Not during the first 12 hours in the detention center, where fluorescent lights never sleep and guards pretend not to stare. He just waits, and when the questioning finally begins, he listens. The first charge, illegal possession of firearms. He smiles faintly. That's the beginning, not the headline. The second charge, cross-border kidnapping and extortion. That's more like it. He doesn't confess. He narrates, like a storyteller reliving a favorite tale. He walks the officers through the Kwok job, through Victor Lee, through the shell companies and safe houses and burner phones. He answers every question, except the ones that don't matter. Names? He gives only the dead. Locations? Only the ones already empty. He speaks with the ease of someone who's rehearsed this in his head for months, and behind every word is something rarer than arrogance, closure. Because Cheung knows this is the final chapter, and he wants to write it himself. Historical fact. Cheung Tze-keung was arrested by Chinese authorities in 1998 in Guangdong province. Though details of the operation remain classified, multiple sources confirm that the arrest was carried out quietly, with significant coordination between regional police and national security agents. He was swiftly transferred to Guangzhou for trial. By the end of the week, Hong Kong media catches up. Headlines scream, old photos resurface, commentators gasp, big spender caught. Tycoon kidnapper arrested on mainland. Man who terrorized the elite faces trial. And behind every article, behind every newsreader's voice, one fact begins to settle across the city like dust. He's really gone. No more sightings, no more whispers. Just one man in a cell, humming to himself under fluorescent light. And if you could see him there, Cheung, seated calmly at a metal table, sipping state-issued tea, you'd notice something strange. He doesn't look defeated. He looks like a man who made his point. The trial is held in Guangzhou, under the kind of heavy cloak that only a state can pull over a spectacle. No cameras, no Western press, no dramatic courtroom sketches. Just concrete, protocol, and the quiet efficiency of a government that doesn't need ratings. It only needs conclusions. Cheung Tze-keung enters the courtroom wearing a light blue prison uniform. His hair is neatly combed, his expression unreadable. He doesn't look nervous. He doesn't look angry. He looks curious, as if wondering how the state plans to perform his finale. There's no jury, just judges. Serious men in dark robes who do not blink, who do not smirk, who treat law not as argument, but as fact in motion. The charges are stacked like bricks. Illegal possession of firearms, kidnapping, extortion, cross-border criminal enterprise, illegal use of explosives, blackmail, money laundering, possession of counterfeit documents. They stop listing around charge 26, not because they run out, but because the room doesn't need the rest. Cheung listens patiently, hands folded in his lap. When given the chance to speak, he does, and what he says shocks the court. Not because of what he confesses, but because of how casually he says it. Yes, he admits to orchestrating the kidnappings. Yes, he confirms the ransom amounts. Yes, he outlines the methods, the tools, even the menu plans for the hostages. But he does so not like a man cornered, more like a man giving a guest lecture. He's articulate, calm, at times even charming. He speaks in perfect Cantonese, with occasional Mandarin phrases tossed in like pepper. When asked why he committed the crimes, he shrugs. They had it, I wanted it, so I took it. He says it the way most people explain borrowing a pen. One courtroom observer later described him as disturbingly at peace. The prosecution presents evidence, phone records, laundered bank documents, smuggled firearms. They play a clip of Walter Kwok reading the ransom note. They play another of Victor Lee confirming his identity. Then they present a list of shell companies, one by one. Dozens of them, each linked to Cheung through a tangled web of bank accounts and bribes. And Cheung? He doesn't flinch, because he knows this isn't a trial. It's a ritual, a performance to prove that even men like him, mythic, larger than life, the type who made billionaires sweat, can still end up under fluorescent lights, speaking to men who wear no emotion. Many people still think Cheung expected this to go differently, that he thought the mainland would cut a deal, trade time for silence. But based on his own words, that theory collapses. So what do you think? Did Cheung walk into his trial believing he could sway the state? Or did he simply want the last word? He gets it. After 3 days of proceedings, the judges deliver their verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, death by firing squad. No appeals, no delays. Execution date within 1 month. The news doesn't break immediately in Hong Kong. It trickles in through whispers, unofficial confirmations, late-night radio murmurs. When it's finally printed, it hits the city like a shock wave, because while most expected a sentence, few expected finality. There is no extradition, no celebrity defense lawyer, no late-night press conference, just a man in a cell, awaiting a dawn most will never see. But even here, in the last stretch of life, Cheung refuses to collapse. He eats, sleeps, reads. He doesn't scream. He doesn't beg. In fact, When guards offer him a final request, he simply asks for a cigarette and a mirror. "Want to see how I look when I go?" he jokes, but no one laughs. Historical note: the Chinese government confirmed Cheung Tze-keung's execution on December 5th, 1998. The details were sparse, the language clinical. It was carried out by firing squad in accordance with Chinese criminal law. No body was publicly returned. No funeral announced. There are no official records of his last words. But one guard, anonymously, claimed he whispered something just before the shots rang out. "Something that didn't make sense at the time," he said. "Tell them I made the city blink." And maybe he did, because in the weeks after, Hong Kong changes. Not visibly, not all at once, but deeply. Boardrooms hold unannounced audits. Private security firms triple their contracts. Tycoons move with more guards. Fewer public appearances. Billionaire families cancel public weddings. Car windows get darker. Schedules more erratic. Trust more expensive. And Cheung's name? It becomes unspeakable in some circles. Too risky, too real. But in bars, in taxis, in smoky backrooms, he becomes a legend. Not a hero, not a villain, a threshold. The man who proved that fear isn't born from chaos. It's born from precision. The city doesn't mourn him, not officially. There are no flowers at the court. No candlelit vigils on Victoria Peak. No slow-moving convoys through the streets of Kowloon. When the news finally confirms his execution, it's buried on page 5, wedged between trade updates and a weather forecast. But Cheung Tze-keung isn't forgotten. He rearranged the silence of Hong Kong, and silence remembers. In the weeks following his death, security firms report a 40% surge in inquiries. Private jet bookings spike. Several billionaires quietly relocate their families to Canada and the UK. Police intercept a shipment of body armor bound for an address in the Peak. The city isn't grieving, it's recalibrating. And in the back alleys of Sham Shui Po, the whispers begin. They say he didn't die. That wasn't his body. There's a vault somewhere in Macau, untouched. It doesn't matter if they're true. Myths, once unleashed, don't need to obey reality. They just need to fill the gaps that fact leaves behind. And Cheung? He left plenty of gaps. Rumors fly that he recorded a final confession, sealed in a bank vault, to be opened in 2030. Others claim a manuscript exists, handwritten in prison, part memoir, part blueprint. Some say it's already circulating on the black market, sold to rich men as bedtime horror stories to keep their children obedient. A few even believe he sold his own fate, traded names, secrets, leverage, for a fake execution and a second life under a new identity somewhere in South America. But most people, those who watched his rise and fall from the safe distance of newsstands and radio dials, just remember the feeling that for a moment, the richest city in Asia held its breath, that for a flicker in time, money wasn't enough. Cheung changed the scale, not of wealth, but of risk. Before him, crime in Hong Kong followed a script. Smuggling, gambling, extortion, the occasional messy feud. But Cheung wrote a new act where the richest men became the most vulnerable, where security detail became a necessity, not a formality. And for the city's underworld, he was a lighthouse and a warning buoy, all in one. Younger gangsters tried to copy his formula, kidnap a lesser executive, demand a smaller ransom, try their luck. But none could replicate the precision, the intelligence, the timing. Cheung didn't just snatch people, he erased margins. And as law enforcement tightened its grip in the late 1990s, those copycats were caught, quickly and loudly. The age of the flamboyant outlaw was ending. The next generation would be quieter, digital, global, but they would all know his name. Historical fact: after Cheung's execution, Hong Kong and mainland authorities launched a wide-reaching crackdown on cross-border crime. Dozens of known associates were investigated, some arrested, others quietly disappeared. The city's financial elite began investing heavily in cybersecurity and risk management, often citing 1997 as a turning point. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong's poorer districts, a different kind of story took root. They remembered Cheung as one of them, a border town kid, a school dropout, a gambler, a rebel who wore suits like armor and spoke to billionaires without flinching. To them, he wasn't just a criminal. He was a man who punched upward. One retired dock worker summed it up best over a lukewarm beer in a sham shui po noodle stall. He made the ones with the helicopters feel how we feel on the bus, just once. That counts for something. Of course, this sympathy was never mainstream. Cheung's victims didn't forget, and neither did their families. Walter Kwok never spoke publicly about the ordeal. Neither did Victor Lee. But those who knew them said their routines never returned to normal. Security became part of their daily language. Risk assessment replaced casual movement. The city they ruled suddenly had shadows they couldn't buy away. And maybe that was Cheung's final gift, a reminder that wealth buys walls, not peace. He may have died in a mainland prison cell, under government command and concrete silence, but his echo lingered in the spaces he exploited. The parking garages with no cameras, the elevators that took too long to close, the drivers who didn't notice a second car behind them until it was too late. And for those who still feared him, long after his body was gone, it wasn't the man they feared, it was the blueprint. Because Cheung Tze-keung didn't just rob the rich, he showed the world how easily it could be done. The phrase big spender doesn't fade. If anything, it multiplies. Passed around like contraband, printed on bootleg shirts, etched into card tables in Macau, whispered across tea shops and betting parlors. Not everyone who says it knows the man behind it, but they feel what it means to live loud, to take what others are too scared to touch, to make the city notice your absence more than it ever did your presence. And for the underworld, that name becomes something of a code, not an idol. Cheung was never soft enough for that, but a symbol of scale, of reach, of what one man with enough nerve and preparation could pull off without firing a single shot. In Mong Kok, a street-level dealer lectures his crew. You think too small. Big Spender didn't. That's why he's in books, and you're hiding cash under a rice cooker. In Wan Chai, a half-drunk triad foot soldier raises a glass and says, "To the man who made the police sweat and the Tycoons stutter." In Aberdeen, a retired inspector reads a report on a new kidnapping case and mutters, "They're all trying to be him, but they don't understand. The guy had discipline." And in rooms where power is discussed behind locked doors and tempered glass, his name surfaces in a different way, not in admiration, in paranoia. Executives now use his name as shorthand for their deepest fear. Do we have a big spender problem? They ask when risk assessments show patterns in security failures. Are we vulnerable to that kind of thing? They whisper when discussing heirs and their unpredictable routines, because the fear wasn't just that Cheung had succeeded, it was that he'd done it so cleanly. He didn't need violence. He didn't need a mob. He didn't even need to gloat. Just a handful of details, a few broken routines, a plan so tight it hummed. Many people still think that Cheung was a product of his time, that the 1990s were a unique blend of political ambiguity and legal gaps that allowed him to thrive. So, what do you think? Was he a ghost of a bygone era? Or a blueprint for the next? Meanwhile, in the border zones, something else happens. Cheung's story becomes a lesson, not just in crime, but in structure. Smugglers in Zhuhai study his operations. Wannabe kidnappers in Guangdong read second-hand accounts of his logistics. A new generation of criminal tacticians grows up seeing him not as a cautionary tale, but a case study. Some get caught quickly, sloppy, loud, reckless. But a few learn. And that, perhaps, is Cheung's longest echo. Not in headlines or trials, but in the methodology he left behind. Because while his crimes were shocking, it was the discipline that truly unsettled the system. Back in Hong Kong, the effects don't go away. The billionaires build higher walls. Their children grow up under tighter surveillance. Insurance premiums for kidnap and ransom coverage quietly triple. Board meetings begin with legal disclaimers and end with transport logistics. The city still glitters, but there's a dullness behind it now. A nervous edge. Even the police change. They adopt new playbooks. Interagency cooperation with mainland authorities becomes more aggressive. Surveillance budgets expand. Cross-border criminal task forces gain real power. The thin line between detective and diplomat blurs, and always Cheung's name is there, not spoken in briefings, but felt as a variable, as a precedent, as a benchmark for what's possible. Historical note: in 1999, a year after Cheung's execution, the Hong Kong government invested heavily in private sector security partnerships. The Safe Business Initiative emerged partly in response to the quiet terror Cheung had sparked. It offered incentives for corporate risk mitigation, updated kidnapping response protocols, and deeper collaboration with international security consultants. And yet, in the corners of the city untouched by money and marble, Cheung's story transforms again. It becomes theatrical. A stage play debuts off Nathan Road, The Man with the Gold Watch. He's not named directly, but the suits, the charm, the fear, obvious. The final line of the play: he didn't steal money, he stole certainty. Then come the songs, one from a Cantonese indie band called Kidnap Club. The chorus: he's not in prison, he's in the mirror. Every plan starts with him. Then an underground comic, black and white, stylized in heavy noir ink. Cheung is drawn like a ghost in a tailor-made suit, haunting the halls of finance, fingers tapping on ledgers that bleed ink. And then, quietly, a limited series podcast. 6 episodes, whispered through headphones across the city. Listeners binge the whole thing in one night. Not because they admire him, but because they can't look away. Cheung isn't just remembered, he's replayed like a film that left its last scene burned onto the screen. And the final twist? In 2005, nearly a decade after his death, a rumor circulates of a man in Vancouver. Quiet, older, heavy with the years, but unmistakably familiar. He pays in cash, tips generously, and once, while drinking alone, refers to a Rolex he used to own before people got nervous. Is it him? Likely not. But it doesn't matter, because by then the myth is too strong, too well dressed, too precisely folded. To Cheung, at a quiet bar in Sai Ying Pun, where the walls are too thick for eavesdropping and the whiskey is poured like confession, an old man leans forward and says, "You know what made him dangerous? It wasn't the crime. It was the calm." No one disagrees, because even now, years after the execution, years after the city cleaned up the mess and swept the name under layers of policy and protocol, Cheung Tze-keung still moves through conversations like an unfinished sentence. People lower their voices when they mention him, not out of fear, out of respect for the gravity. He's become a reference point, the name people invoke when discussing what shouldn't be possible. The impossible he made look effortless. The scale, the silence, the way he held Hong Kong in his palm for just long enough to leave fingerprints no one can scrub off. But all stories, even those wrapped in gold and gunpowder, eventually go quiet. And as we ease into the close of tonight's tale, let's step back from the noise. Let the lights dim. Let the traffic of 1990s Kowloon fade into fog. Let the buzz of casino tables quiet into soft static. You're lying in bed now, the weight of the blanket just right, the rhythm of breath returning to something steady. The room, calm. The night, deep and somewhere out there, in an alley, in a memory, in a headline, you can still feel the outline of a man in a suit who asked too little and took too much. But here, in this moment, none of that matters because the story is ending. The door is closing, and all that's left is the silence that follows when someone like Cheung Tze-keung finally leaves the room. No gunshot, no sirens, just the soft, final hush of certainty folding itself into the dark. So breathe. You're safe. The legend is over, and your part is to sleep. Let your heartbeat slow. Let the city shrink down to a whisper. And if you dream of gold watches and shadowed rooftops, remember, it's just a story now, just a bedtime tale, and you're still here, warm, still, quiet. But legends, no matter how carefully buried, have a way of resurfacing, especially when the world changes faster than it can explain itself. The 2000s arrive like a new suit, sleeker, digital, impersonal. Hong Kong reinvents itself as a global finance titan, a city of sterile lobbies and algorithmic wealth. The triads pull back. Street crime goes underground. Surveillance rises. And yet, amid the upgraded systems and polished glass towers, Cheung Tze-keung's shadow refuses to fade. Because his name isn't just history, it's a variable. He's mentioned in police training manuals, not as a man, but as a model. Watch for behavior consistent with big spender protocols. Security consultants refer to him in boardroom pitches. We offer protection against Cheung-type attacks. Even CEOs, long after the memory should have softened, still flinch slightly when his story is retold with the lights low. And what's strange, what makes him different, is how many of those same people who once feared him now speak of him with reluctant admiration. He wasn't a thug, one former tycoon says during a confidential interview for a university study. He was surgical. That's what sticks. Not the ransom totals, not the charges, not even the execution. What survives is the precision. He kidnapped billionaires, not out of anger, not to make a scene, but to prove a point. That even the highest floors and the tallest towers are just one cracked lock away from collapse. It's that realization, whispered between lines of protocol and planning, that keeps his name alive long after most criminals would have faded into mugshots and trivia. Historical fact. In 2007, a university criminology course at the Chinese University of Hong Kong included a case study titled Cheung Tze-keung, Methods, Myth, and Impact. It explored not only his criminal operations, but how his legacy shaped modern corporate security practices in Asia. And even now, more than a decade after his death, threads remain loose. There are accounts that haven't been closed, transactions that still bounce between blind accounts impossible to trace, a Macau casino ledger that lists a final chip withdrawal under a name that doesn't exist, an old Shanghai banking officer now retired who once swore under his breath. One of the accounts still moves, very little, very slowly, but it moves. None of it is confirmed. But then again, it doesn't need to be, because Cheung didn't rely on truth. He relied on doubt, and doubt is harder to kill than any man. Some nights, stories still flare up in the underground, always unverified, always passed from mouth to mouth, that someone saw him in Manila at a horse track, that someone else recognized him in Sydney, walking a dog and speaking fluent English, that a waitress in Jakarta swears she served a man who tipped her with a coin pressed into her palm and said, "This buys silence, not soda." Are they true? Probably not. But the mere fact that people are still asking, that they're still looking, is proof that Cheung's greatest trick wasn't the kidnappings, or the ransoms, or the clean exits. It was becoming the question no one could stop asking. And in Hong Kong, questions like that linger. In shaded temples, incense coils wind upward, and grandmothers still mutter blessings for the safety of their sons, not from car accidents or illness, but from that kind of danger, the kind that doesn't wear a mask or hold a gun, the kind that wears a suit, smiles, knows your name. Cheung's presence wasn't violent, it was structural. He broke routines. He turned assumptions into weapons, and in doing so, he rearranged fear itself. So yes, Hong Kong moved on. It grew, got sleeker, smarter, more secure. But in every executive panic room, in every armored convoy, in every whispered security report that gets passed quietly between assistants and CEOs, there is always the final line. This is to prevent another Cheung. Because once a man like that walks through your walls, you never forget the outline of the door he left behind. The air in Shenzhen has changed. It's cleaner now somehow, filtered through years of growth and reform, washed by ambition and steel. Skyscrapers stretch where there were once warehouses. High-speed trains whisper past places where secrets used to rot quietly in alleyways. But if you know where to look, really look, you can still find the old bones of the city Cheung once haunted. And deep in those bones, tucked behind unregistered apartments and shuttered herbal shops, some people still carry his echo. Not many, just a few. A former tailor who remembers fitting him in silence, eyes on the chalk lines. A phone technician who still swears Cheung paid for every burner in full, exact bills. Never a cent over, never a question asked. A woman who cleaned the windows of a high-rise and once caught his reflection in the glass. He winked, she says, like he knew the city couldn't catch up. They don't speak publicly, but they remember. Because even now, after all the arrests, the crackdowns, the reforms, nothing ever quite replaced him. Criminal empires still rise and fall. Smugglers still run their cargo. Triads still exist, scattered and sanitized. But no one has moved the axis the way Cheung did. He didn't run rackets. He didn't hold turf. He held imagination. That was his real territory, people's blind spots. Even the law struggles to write about him clearly. Too violent for admiration, too intelligent for dismissal, too successful for simple vilification. Many people still argue over what Cheung really was. A gangster? A terrorist? A thief? A genius? So what do you think? Can a man be all of those at once and still be understood? One retired Hong Kong inspector thinks not. He says Cheung's story can't be filed in any single folder. "We didn't arrest a criminal," he once muttered into a reporter's recorder. "We arrested a question." And it's true, even in death Cheung unsettled clarity. Because though he's gone, the world he disrupted still tries to adapt to him. There are tech startups now, modeling security systems based on big spender theory. An algorithm designed not to detect threats directly, but to identify patterns of calm that shouldn't exist. One financial think tank published a paper called The Cheung Curve, charting how systemic trust erodes when high-value individuals are proven vulnerable. An artist in Berlin recreated his ransom notes as typography installations. The piece was titled Asset Reallocation. The world keeps trying to explain him, to pin him down, to shrink him. But every time they do, his outline flares larger. Because Cheung didn't just walk through systems, he exposed them. And the systems didn't like that. Historical footnote. Following Cheung's death, several Hong Kong newspapers launched independent investigations into systemic failures that allowed the kidnappings. Most of the reports were never published. Sources were spooked. Editors stepped back. One investigative journalist was transferred to sports reporting with no explanation. Even today, the gaps remain. No one knows where all the ransom money went. No one knows how he built such a precise network without a centralized gang. No one knows who his silent partners were, or if they were eliminated. There are still bank accounts that spark to life once a year, with single coded transactions. Still surveillance footage that shows a man, blurred and sharply dressed, stepping onto ferries in Macau and vanishing before he reaches the other side. It's probably not him. But again, probably doesn't mean much when he made probability bend, and every once in a while, late at night, someone on a rooftop or in the back of a police car or leaning over a whiskey glass will say the words, "No one admits during daylight." If he were still alive, I think he'd be proud of this mess. Not the crime, the shape of it, the way a city rearranged its breathing because one man once refused to whisper. Because in the end, Cheung Tze-keung didn't die to prove he was right. He lived to show that they were wrong. It's strange, isn't it? How some ghosts aren't content to haunt rooms or photographs. Some ghosts haunt structures. In the years following Cheung Tze-keung's execution, the buildings he passed through, offices, casinos, hotels, began to change. Slowly at first. A new layer of tint on the windows, extra cameras in the lobby, two-step elevator systems requiring ID and thumbprints, not because anyone believed he'd return, but because someone like him might. That's the thing about legacy. It doesn't need to wear your face. It just needs to wear your blueprint. In 2010, a tech billionaire from Beijing is photographed flanked by bodyguards at a Hong Kong airport. When asked why the sudden increase in security, he replies without smiling, "Ask Big Spender." He was 15 when Cheung kidnapped Victor Lee. He never forgot. In Singapore, at a security summit, an ex-MI6 consultant is asked what keeps Asian elites awake at night. His answer is one word: Cheung. When the audience laughs, he doesn't. And across the Pacific, in private circles of financial intelligence firms in Los Angeles and London, his case file still circulates. Not as a cold case, not as a historical curiosity, as a training module. It's titled Asymmetric Criminal Pressure on High Net Worth Individuals, the Cheung Model, and it's considered essential reading because unlike most criminals, Cheung's impact wasn't measured by body count or brutality. It was measured by how fast billionaires rewrote their morning routines after hearing his name, how CEOs started sleeping in layers of silence, hiring men to stand between them and their nightmares, how the rich for once remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable. Cheung reshaped the emotional architecture of wealth, and that perhaps was more dangerous than anything he did with a ransom call. Meanwhile, in the Hong Kong underworld, the name Big Spender undergoes evolution. For some, it's still a badge. Young hustlers quote his lines, dress in slim-cut suits, memorize case details like scripture. They don't want to be him, but they want to be close to what he meant. Confidence, calculation, control. But for others, especially older players, his name is a warning, a cautionary tale told to any kid who starts thinking they're invincible. Cheung flew too close, they say. He made the rich bleed and forgot that governments bleed slower, but aim better. One mid-level boss from the New Territories was overheard growling at a hot-headed lieutenant. "You ain't Cheung." He built silence around him. You build noise, because that was Cheung's real trick. He didn't need fireworks. He walked through Hong Kong's bones so quietly, the city didn't realize it had changed until it was already limping. In Guangzhou, a low-level administrator at the Ministry of Justice once asked his superior, "Why no monument? Not even a line in the museum?" The superior answered with a shrug. "He embarrassed us. You don't honor embarrassment." But some monuments don't need bricks. There's the bar in Macau that still keeps a bottle of Yamazaki hidden behind the register. For the one who never paid in cash, the owner jokes. There's the black Mercedes still parked in a private garage in Kowloon, untouched, undriven, rumored to have once belonged to a man who didn't fear the rearview mirror. There's even the whispered story of a banker who receives a postcard every December, unmarked, unsigned, bearing only a drawing of a gold watch with no hands. Cheung didn't believe in nostalgia, but he understood placement. He knew that to live forever, you don't need to shout. You just need to arrange your absence so carefully that it fills every room you've left. Historical fact. No statues, no plaques, no memorials, Cheung's name does not appear on any official register outside court archives. His property was seized, his accounts erased, his physical traces wiped clean, but he is still the only individual to have successfully kidnapped two of Hong Kong's most powerful heirs, collected both ransoms, and disappeared twice before ever being seen as a formal suspect. And he did it without a single shot fired. No car chase, no explosion, no bloody shootout, just timing, structure, and a silence too deliberate to ignore. So when we speak of legends and we line them up like suspects in the history of crime, we must be careful, because some wore scars and left trails. But Cheung, he wore a smile and left only mirrors. Some nights, it rains on Hong Kong like it's trying to wash history off the skyline, not with thunder, but with that long, tired drizzle. The kind that doesn't flood, doesn't break, just lingers, soft and steady, like memory refusing to dry. And on those nights, somewhere in the city, someone always thinks about him, not because they loved him, but because they remember what it felt like when the world bent slightly out of shape and they realized nobody was in charge. Cheung Tze-keung didn't just exploit gaps in the system, he revealed them. He didn't destroy trust, he measured it, and then he sold it back to the people who thought they'd never lose it. That's a different kind of power. It's not muscle, it's math. And now, decades later, the numbers still haven't quite settled. Somewhere in a private meeting room atop the IFC tower, an insurance consultant is still writing a clause with Cheung in mind. Somewhere in a gated mansion in Deepwater Bay, a silent panic button was installed specifically for another big spender scenario. Somewhere in a corporate retreat, a billionaire heir is warned by his father, "Don't be too predictable. Remember what happened in '97. Cheung's name might not be carved in stone, but it's coded into behavior." A story circulates now and then, never printed, never confirmed. A customs official at Lok Ma Chau swears he once intercepted a diplomatic pouch from Portugal with a note inside. No ID, no signature, just a single line. "Thank you for teaching me timing." It was dismissed, filed under anomalies. But the older agents? The ones who were around in the 90s? They froze when they saw it, because that's the thing about Cheung. He made timing feel like a weapon. Even in academic circles, the conversation continues. A sociology professor from the University of Tokyo calls him a symptom of trust inflation. An Oxford criminologist refers to him as a pre-digital hacker who manipulated the operating system of social status. The terms are new, the insights sharp. But the core remains the same. Cheung didn't rob banks, he robbed certainty. He took the most guarded asset in Asia, the illusion that money equals safety, and shattered it with a smile and a burner phone. And that has consequences, because once someone shows you how the game works, you can't unsee the levers. Cheung's legacy isn't bloodstained, it's blueprinted. And the people who inherited the city, the tech billionaires, crypto tycoons, logistics magnates, they may not know him by name, but they live in a world he rewrote. Many people still argue whether Cheung was a criminal mastermind or just an opportunist with flair. Some call him a modern pirate. Others, a walking indictment of the systems that allowed him to exist. But the smartest people don't try to define him. They just prepare for the next him. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that men like Cheung don't vanish. They recur. In new suits, in new cities, with new tools. They don't shout. They fold themselves into silence and wait until one day a phone rings somewhere it shouldn't, and the room forgets how to breathe. One final detail. In the archives of the Chinese Supreme People's Court, in a file marked closed, there is an internal memo. It's a short document. 3 lines. Cheung Tze-keung showed the limits of both borders and systems. He operated outside structure, but not outside consequence. Let this be a reminder. Silence does not mean absence, and beneath it no signature, just the red ink of finality. So tonight, as the lights dim and the city sleeps under clouds that still carry echoes of sirens and gold, remember, the loudest criminals leave headlines, the most dangerous leave procedures. And Cheung? He left a city forever, leaning toward the door that didn't lock quite right. They say legacy lives in the shadows we cast, not the statues we build. If that's true, then Cheung Tze-keung cast a city-sized shadow, longer than his reach, deeper than his vaults, and sharper than the headlines that tried and failed to contain him. By the late 2010s, Hong Kong's skyline has changed again. Glass replaces brick. Surveillance replaces memory. And Cheung? He's been dead for 2 decades. But still, he lingers, not as a face, not even as a story, but as a standard. You see it in how billionaires live now, moving in choreographed routes, swapping cars at tunnel exits, upgrading panic rooms not because they're paranoid, but because someone once proved they should be. You see it in law enforcement drills, mock exercises where the kidnapper is Cheung type, a designation now used as shorthand for methodical, charismatic, unaligned threat. And you hear it, if you listen closely, in the spaces between silence. In the way CEOs pause before they say safe. In the way old-school gangsters pour their drinks a little heavier when someone mentions the man who smiled through his verdict. Because Cheung didn't go down swinging. He went down smiling. And that choice to remain calm while the entire system collapsed on him, is what makes his echo impossible to mute. In 2018, a journalist from a French crime magazine retraces Cheung's footsteps through Kowloon and Macau. He interviews bartenders, customs agents, retired drivers. The article runs under the title, "The Don Without a Gang." In it, the journalist writes, "Most legends are carved from blood. Cheung carved his from silence, timing, and the blind spots between men who thought they were too rich to vanish." The piece goes viral, and for a new generation who never heard his name in real time, he becomes a meme, a mystery, a mid-lecture interruption in criminology courses from Buenos Aires to Berlin. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, people still ask, where did the money go? Not just the ransoms, but the profits from side deals, the shell companies, the whispered partnerships Cheung may or may not have had with corrupt officials. Theories bloom like mold. One says he buried millions in gold bars beneath a golf course in Guangdong. Another insists he converted it into antique scrolls auctioned under false names. A wilder one claims it was all fake, that Cheung never kept a cent, only played a role written for him by men who remain untouched. The truth? No one knows, because unlike most criminals, Cheung didn't leave a mess. He left design. Historical note. In 2020, a Hong Kong law firm accidentally released internal documents referencing a trust formed in 1996 under a Cheung alias. The fund had since grown through offshore real estate and undisclosed crypto holdings. The name on the file? Mr. C. Tang. No official connection was ever confirmed, and yet the timing, the amounts, the origin trail, unmistakable. Someone, somewhere, kept the engine running. But beyond the theories, beyond the bank trails and whispers and barstool confessions, there remains a feeling, hard to name, harder to shake, a kind of collective breath still held in parts of the city that remember the before. The time before, rich meant safe. Before money meant immunity. Before a man in a velvet suit with no gang and no warning took the myth of untouchability and folded it into a ransom note. He didn't just take hostages. He took the illusion of control, and he never apologized for it. Not once, because Cheung never asked to be admired, only understood. There's an old recording, one that never made it to court. A snatch of interview from early in his detention. The guard who heard it says Cheung was asked, "Do you regret anything?" The reply came without hesitation, "No, but I do wonder, if I had done it all again, slower, would I have lasted longer? Not richer, not safer, longer, because that's the paradox of men like Cheung. They don't burn out chasing fame. They burn because they can't unknow the architecture of vulnerability. And once you've mapped that, there's no going back. So now, Every time someone disappears briefly from a convoy, every time a tycoon switches residences without notice, every time an insurance firm revises their kidnapping clause, Cheung is there, not as a ghost, as a calculation, the line of code no one can delete. And maybe that's the real ending. Not the cell, not the trial, not even the gunshots, but the fact that one man, once, turned Hong Kong into a place where certainty is now rented, not owned. And for all their riches, no one's figured out how to buy it back. Some names get louder after death, not because they're spoken often, but because they're spoken carefully, with pauses, with looks over the shoulder, with the kind of restraint usually reserved for power or prophecy. Cheung Tze-keung's name is one of those. It stopped being a man years ago. Now it's a cipher. In 2023, a private security firm operating in Hong Kong introduces a proprietary risk classification system. At the top of its internal scale, above armed threat and coordinated attack, is a silent category marked Type C. They don't explain what it stands for, but everyone inside knows. It means him. There's no shrine, no grave with flowers, no dusty plaque in the back corner of a cemetery. Whatever remains of Cheung, physically, is likely gone, scattered in state-kept silence somewhere behind mainland fences, but you can still find him, if you know where to look, in the algorithms that now monitor tycoon travel patterns, in the blueprints of armored vehicle retrofits, in the third bodyguard that no one ever introduces, but is always present. He's not haunting anyone. They're haunting themselves because of what he proved, that even the most invulnerable lives have doorways, and all it takes is one man willing to walk through them. A Hong Kong documentary team once tried to produce a limited series about him. 3 episodes in, production halted. Funding disappeared. Licensing redacted. The project vanished. No explanation, only speculation. And in that vacuum, Cheung's legacy swells again, not as a criminal, as a trigger, for fear, for intrigue, for consequence, because his story is too dangerous to dramatize, too seductive to fully suppress. It lives in shadows, not because it's forced to, but because the shadows are where leverage grows. In a closed-door academic seminar at Cambridge, a criminologist presents a paper titled Architects of Anomaly, Non-Affiliated Threat Agents in Wealth-Dense Zones. The central case? Cheung. The presentation opens with a quote pulled from one of the few surviving interviews. Everyone thought they were safe because they followed the rules. I just followed the cracks. That quote becomes a kind of academic koan, not because it's poetic, because it's true. Even systems that run smoothly are built on silent exceptions. Cheung didn't invent the cracks. He just knew where they echoed the loudest. And for a city that prides itself on polish and momentum, that realization was devastating, because Cheung Tze-keung wasn't a mistake. He was a mirror. You hear reflections of him now in the way elite families speak in code about travel plans, the way they hire firms in Zurich and Tel Aviv to cross-reference routes before boarding a car, the way they refuse to say certain names aloud, not out of superstition, but from a knowledge that the line between past and present is thinner than it looks. And maybe that's why Cheung remains so dangerous. He was never technically a mastermind. He had no throne, no chain of command, no flags, no blood oaths. He had tools, he had structure, he had nerve. And when he moved with the unshakable rhythm of someone who knew the system was too arrogant to notice a man without a title. He never asked for entry. He rewrote the blueprints. Historical detail. In 2024, during a cybersecurity symposium in Hong Kong, a keynote speaker described a breach simulation involving a coordinated, non-digital assault on a corporation's C-suite executives. The internal nickname for the test? Operation Big Spender. The room laughed, but none of the executives did. Maybe one day the story will fade. Maybe Hong Kong will get loud enough, fast enough, bright enough to bury the quiet that Cheung installed in its bones. But even then, even when the glass towers grow higher and the archives yellow into irrelevance, one truth will remain. He made them blink. All of them. The billionaires, the bodyguards, the bureaucrats. And that blink, that 1 second of exposed realization, was all he ever needed. So, the next time you hear a whisper in a boardroom, or a pause in a convoy plan, or someone recalculating how far trust can stretch before it becomes vulnerability, know this: it's not paranoia, it's not fiction. It's just the city remembering that once, one man walked in through the front door and never had to knock. At some point, you realize Cheung Tze-keung never really needed to escape, because escaping implies you're being chased. And for most of his run, Cheung wasn't. He moved through Hong Kong, Macau, and the mainland, not like a fugitive, but like someone who belonged. Not in any social class, but in the negative space between them. Between law and loophole. Between visibility and myth. He didn't hide. He just never waited long enough to be found. And by the time the world figured out the size of his footprint, he was already gone. Or worse, already watching from the next room. There's a surveillance photo, grainy and half-fogged, of a man walking through the Zhuhai ferry terminal sometime in mid-1998. He wears sunglasses and a pale linen suit. He's holding a folded newspaper in one hand and a small thermos in the other. His face is mostly turned away, but rumor says it's him. The timestamp is 2 days before his arrest. If that was Cheung, the image would be one of the last ever taken of him in public. Free. But there's no sense of panic in the way he moves. No rush, no tension. Just the casual, efficient pace of a man who knows exactly how long he has left and has already budgeted it. It's that poise that unsettles people more than the crimes ever did. Anyone can pull a trigger. Anyone can steal. But to do what Cheung did, twice, against the most powerful families in Asia, and to walk away smiling, that's rare, and it's what makes his story survive in places most stories rot. Quiet conversations between the people who built the new Hong Kong. They won't say his name, but they cite him in other ways, in footnotes, in risk memos, in asset insurance clauses that read, "Coverage includes threat of targeted nonviolent executive abduction." There's only one reason that sentence exists, and his initials aren't even needed. In 2025, an international security firm hosts a panel on the future of asymmetric threats to high net worth individuals. One slide in the presentation simply reads, "One man, no army, no gang, no trace. 2 billionaires, 0 shots fired." It's met with silence. No one asks for elaboration. They already know. Because Cheung's legacy isn't just about what he did. It's about how he did it, and how no one, not even now, has managed to replicate it. Not really. Others have tried. Copycats in Manila, a failed ring in Jakarta, a crude attempt in Dubai, but they all lacked what made Cheung terrifying. He didn't improvise, he anticipated. He didn't provoke, he invited compliance, and he didn't threaten power. He made power come to him quietly with open hands. That's a very different kind of criminality. The kind that feels more like an equation than a person. And still the theories persist. Some say he cut a deal before the arrest, that he gave up something bigger in exchange for a clean, staged ending. Others think he was merely the face of something deeper, more networked, a consortium, perhaps. A rogue branch of influence that needed a figurehead, then discarded him when his usefulness expired. And the rest? The ones who look a little too long at the ferry terminal photo. They think he's alive, that the execution was performed on a double, that he bought a new name, that he's sipping bitter coffee somewhere near the Mediterranean, checking markets and laughing at the stories being told about him. That's the power of a clean exit. It leaves the ending flexible. Historical footnote. As of today, no complete financial trace has ever been published that accounts for the entirety of Cheung's ransom hauls. Some of the funds were reportedly returned to victim families through sealed negotiations, but a vast portion remains unclaimed, unlisted, unconfirmed. And so the final chapter remains unwritten, not because it's unfinished, but because Cheung chose to leave the last page blank. As an invitation, as a dare, as a signature, only the careful know how to read. And perhaps that's what makes him the most dangerous kind of story, the kind that never quite ends. By now, the city has moved on, at least on the surface. Skyscrapers glitter harder, the streets feel tighter, and wealth wears newer faces, younger hands. The skyline Cheung once disappeared behind has grown taller, more mirrored. You'd think time had swallowed him whole, but ask the right driver. Ask a veteran detective with half his pension in silence. Ask a man who used to hold umbrellas for tycoons in the rain. They'll tell you, we still drive around his absence, because Cheung wasn't erased. He was absorbed into protocols, into paranoia, into architecture. His memory sits somewhere between concrete and instinct. In Hong Kong's central business district, elevators require key cards with rotating encryption. In Causeway Bay, armored Mercedes line curbside valet queues like a quiet ballet of fear. In office towers, back stairwells are monitored more carefully than boardrooms. Why? Because once, one man proved those were the doors that mattered. A strange thing happens to history when it's too clean. It grows teeth. And Cheung's story, in its efficiency, has become too smooth to fully distrust, too jagged to fully teach. Universities cite him as a case, but even professors admit there's something missing, something never declassified, something still warm. A Hong Kong lit journal once printed a fictionalized version of Cheung's life under the title The Guest List. In it, the narrator isn't Cheung, but a waiter who serves him every Wednesday in a Macau cafe, never speaking, always noticing. The final line of the story reads, "And when he stood to leave, the sunlight moved like it was following him." That story won an award, but it was never published again. No explanation, just a quiet request from a government cultural liaison to remove it from reprint. Because Cheung's presence is still operational, not officially, not legally, not even physically, but emotionally, systemically. He's the blueprint that's no longer on paper but still somewhere in the walls. In 2026, a tech CEO in Seoul is briefly abducted by a man who mimics Cheung's tactics. Smooth entry, zero violence, clean escape. It makes international headlines, but the CEO is returned in 6 hours, unharmed. And on the table of the safe house, authorities find a calling card. A single Hong Kong $500 note, folded into a perfect square, stamped with red ink in the corner, CTK. Authorities call it a hoax. The man arrested is a 28-year-old crypto-anarchist with a taste for theatrics. But that folded note, the ink used, not modern, archival. From a printing batch last issued in 1997, it's probably nothing. But the old cops, they don't blink when they hear it. They just say, of course. He'd never leave the ending untouched. Even among triad circles, Cheung has taken on a role beyond mere legend. He's become a litmus test. Say his name and see who flinches, who rolls their eyes, who stays quiet just a beat too long. One aging enforcer in Mongkok once said, "You don't talk about Cheung, you wait to see who does, because stories this potent, they're not told. They're revealed by pressure, by silence, by need." Historical aside, in 2027, a sealed testimony from a mainland official is accidentally leaked to an independent Hong Kong podcast. The recording contains the official's final comments on Cheung before retirement. "We feared him not for what he took, but for what he exposed. That we had no defense against a man who asked only questions and waited for our lies." The clip goes viral, then disappears. Only mirrored copies remain, scattered across encrypted servers and dark web forums. It's become a kind of digital graffiti. He didn't steal, he revealed. Printed on hoodies, scrawled on alley walls. It's become a motto for a generation too young to remember Cheung's face, but old enough to feel his footprint beneath the marble floors of every bank. Because some people rewrite crime, Cheung rewrote wealth. He didn't challenge its existence. He challenged its immunity. And now, decades later, every time a tycoon hires another layer of protection, Every time a government rewrites an extradition clause, every time a whisper travels faster than a camera, it's not out of fear, it's out of memory of a man who smiled like a magician, vanished like a question, and left behind a silence that still calculates risk. You'd think the world would forget. Enough years pass, and even the sharpest names blur around the edges. New scandals, new kings, new tech. The cycle refreshes faster than memory can hold. But Cheung Tze-keung, he refuses to fade. Not by force, by design. In 2028, a closed-door seminar at Interpol's Lion headquarters hosts a private talk titled Case Studies in Asymmetric Asset Targeting. The speaker, a retired mainland intelligence analyst, opens with a slide. He didn't take what was vulnerable. He made what was powerful feel vulnerable. That's not theft. That's leverage. No name is mentioned, but the room goes still because the audience knows. You don't need to say Cheung Tze-keung anymore. You just describe the weather he created, and everyone steps under the same storm. Even now, in cities he never set foot in, his name pulses beneath the surface. In Zurich, a wealth management firm adjusts its elite protocols after reading an internal risk memo with a footnote citing 1997 HK case, big spender parameters. In Singapore, ultra-rich families engage consultants to prepare non-predictable movement protocols, a direct echo of Cheung's habit of preying on routine. In Dubai, a private investigator builds a simulation based on Cheung's method, testing whether high-profile clients could be tracked without digital tools. The result? They can, because Cheung's genius wasn't technology, it was anticipation. He understood people more than systems, understood when they'd relax, when they'd repeat, when they'd assume no one was watching, and he timed his moves like a clockmaker disassembling fate. Many people still argue whether Cheung was an innovator or simply a man in the right place at the right time. Some call him a psychological predator. Others, a necessary correction to unchecked privilege. But those who saw him closely, detectives, drivers, guards, they describe him in stranger terms. He made rooms quieter. He didn't walk. He steered. You didn't see him coming. You saw yourself pausing after he left. There's no curriculum for that, just presence. In 2029, a retired logistics billionaire gives a rare interview from his lakeside villa in Switzerland. When asked about his greatest fear during his peak business years, he doesn't mention economic collapse or political instability. He says, waking up to silence, the wrong kind, the kind that Cheung Tze-keung left behind. A new generation discovers Cheung the way people used to discover urban legends. On late-night Reddit threads, in bite-sized podcasts, in speculative documentaries where they animate his face, but still can't capture his stillness. But the older ones, those who were adults in '97, they don't click like. They sit back, and they remember the moment the illusion of safety slipped. Because it wasn't just the money or the audacity, it was what Cheung forced them to see. That status is not armor, and that one well-dressed man with the right voice, the right read, the right moment, could rewrite who mattered in a room. Historical artifact. A sealed envelope once mailed to the South China Morning Post in 2001 contained a single item, a silver tie clip engraved with the initials CTK and the phrase, "Not yet." The sender was never identified, and the envelope had no fingerprints, just a trail of curiosity that's never been closed. Was it a taunt, a hoax, or something left behind by someone who, even in death, didn't believe in punctuation? You don't build a legend by force. You build it by making people doubt what they thought was solid. And Cheung? He made Hong Kong doubt its skyline, its networks, its logic. He made billionaires remember they were still flesh, and lawmen remember that rules mean nothing when someone's already walking around them. That's not crime. That's architecture. And even now it holds. So, as this story nears its final thread, know this. Legends are usually shaped by what they did, But the rare ones, like Cheung, are shaped by what they made the world afraid to do again. And that's why, in the background of 1,000 city plans, escort timetables, risk models, and late-night negotiations, his ghost is still budgeting the margin for error. There's a strange kind of silence in Hong Kong these days. Not the quiet of night nor the hush of meditation. It's a calculated, mechanical silence. The kind you find in bank vaults behind encrypted doors, in the soft tap of biometric pads waiting for permission. It's the Cheung silence, because no matter how far the city rises, no matter how much glitz they pour over the bones, his shadow lingers not as a threat, but as a system check. In the polished boardrooms of Admiralty, where conversations orbit capital and control, his name is almost never said. Almost. But when it is, usually after the third drink, when the room gets heavy and the future feels closer than the past, someone will whisper it just to see what happens. Big spender, and in that moment, everything recalibrates. Even the most confident faces twitch. Someone leans forward. Someone excuses themselves. Someone else finally admits that no one, not even now, knows where all the money went, because they don't. Cheung's wealth, his ransom, his cash pyramids, his gold bars, his untouched accounts, was never truly mapped. And maybe that's the final joke, that the man who took billions never left a ledger. Just a feeling, a blueprint made from doubt and timing, a mythology crafted not in violence but in precision. In 2030, a Hong Kong artist stages an immersive installation titled Exit Strategies. In one of the rooms, visitors walk alone into a simulated hotel suite, 1990s decor, gentle rain sounds outside the window. On the desk, a half-smoked cigar, a manila envelope, a gold Rolex still ticking. A voicemail loop plays on a static old phone. It's just the soft sound of someone laughing. Not a sinister laugh. Just knowing. It lasts 22 seconds and ends with a soft click. No name is spoken. No context is given. And every visitor leaves in silence, because the point isn't what's in the room, it's what's missing. The legend of Cheung Tze-keung isn't about how he died. It's about how he moved. Through trust, through assumption, through the thin membranes between wealth and fear. He didn't smash doors. He didn't burn bridges. He held up a mirror and waited, and the world, for one suspended heartbeat, saw itself. Today, in a government safe in Beijing, Cheung's case file remains partially redacted. His autopsy report has never been published. No footage of his execution exists in the public record. Some say that's normal. Others say it's strategic, and a few still wonder, just wonder, if the man who always had an escape plan might have used his final curtain as one last disappearing act. Maybe it's nonsense, but then again, Cheung was never about the surface. He was about the gap between what we believe and what we're too afraid to verify. So here we are, a story wrapped in silk and shadows. A man with no army, no turf, no ideology. Just a suitcase, a smile, and an exit strategy better than anything the system could prepare for. He was real. He was dangerous. He was quiet. And that, in the end, is the scariest thing of all, because you can guard against bullets. You can prepare for betrayal. But how do you protect yourself from the man who doesn't knock? Who doesn't threaten? Who just steps into your confidence, takes what he wants, and leaves you blaming yourself? That's Cheung Tze-keung's legacy. Not violence, not wealth, vulnerability, and the whisper he left behind. It was never about the money. It was about what you assumed I wouldn't dare. Now let it all slip away. The headlines, the briefcases, the marble lobbies and gold watches. Let the noise of Hong Kong dim into something distant. A watercolor skyline beneath slow-moving clouds. The city exhales, and so do you. Your room is still. Your breath, easy. You are far from ransom notes, from ferry terminals, from the tick of high-stakes tension. You're just here now, warm, wrapped in the hush of understanding something few people ever do. That sometimes the most dangerous people in history leave no smoke, no blood. Just a pause, a gap, a realization. And maybe that's all Cheung ever wanted, to remind the world that its locks were ornamental, that trust, left unwatched, turns into access. But that's not your worry tonight. Your only task now is to drift, to follow the soft edges of this story as it fades into dreams. No more footsteps, no more suitcases, just the soft hum of a distant city and the comfort of knowing your door is locked. Your lights are low, and nothing moves unless you let it. The legend has stepped off stage, and the story? It's folded away, neat, final, still ticking like a gold watch in a drawer. Sleep well. The big spender has left the room.